Next, fantastic privilege from Oxford and Chile. Isabel Behncke is a primatologist. Now, primatologists are basically consumer researchers who like jungles. I mean, if you think about it, market research is a very, very specialist form of primatology for lazy, unadventurous, greedy people. So what you will see is something I've long believed, is that actually all forms of meaning, of signaling, require some degree of illogic or wastage. There is no form of advertising which is perfectly efficient, because without some cost implied, it's not a reliable signal and has no meaning. Now, that cost can either be in the form of expenditure, it can be in the form of risk, it can be in the form of financial expenditure, it can be in the form of creativity, the use of something which is scarce and difficult. But without some cost or effort or risk, something that defies absolute conventional logic, there is no messaging. And with a fantastic lesson from some very close relatives, the bonobos, here's Isabel to explain. Thank you very much indeed. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. Good morning. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. And just hearing Rory now, I realized, oh my God, that's what I came here to do. I walked 3,000 kilometers through Congo, through the heart of darkness, to finally be able to say, to find my purpose. Rory is right. This is what my life purpose is. It's really to show that there's a huge marketing budget that nature has, and that you can't really get away without it. Can we have the first slide? No. That was a slide that was not going to be there, but now that it's here, the first slide was the title slide. That actually sets the pace quite well. So George Orwell in 1948 wrote this fantastic essay, I really recommend it, Funny Not Vulgar, where he makes the point that if you look at the best satirist of human nature, whether it's Shakespeare or Voltaire, no one has what we can call today clean fun. In other words, they were all pushing boundaries. They were pushing boundaries in dangerous ways. They were pushing boundaries in costly ways. The idea being that you cannot have true creativity with clean fun, which of course has important implications in the world of today, like trigger warnings and so on. But actually, that was not my first slide. So that was my first slide. So I'm going to talk about the biology of fun. And why? Because the biology of fun, it's one very important lever of this at least 15 levers that Rory was talking about. And I think it's a lever that is completely underrated. We know it when we see it, but we don't know how to use it. And of course, in his famous example of the Eurostar, Rory was talking about quality of experience. So first of all, everybody who knows Rory's example of the Eurostar? Yeah, everyone, right? So it's really redefining what enjoyment is. And the brilliant point that we really should have a hedon, a measure of hedonism. Because at the end, what do we remember? And of course, memory is mediated by experience and intensity of emotion, is what we enjoy. So I'll ask you, let's start with a quiz. I want to know, tell me, what do these species have in common? And I mean it. Tell me. Anyone? They're mammals? The birds, say again? They play. Very good. The key was on the balls there, yes. So actually, but it is interesting, yeah, so they're playing. But if you think from an evolutionary point of view, nature is doing something really weird here. First of all, you have birds and you have mammals. So what can explain the commonalities? Not the last common ancestor, right? Because the last common ancestor of mammals and birds lived, say, around 300 million years ago. So common origin of this trait cannot be the sole explanation. Then, look around. They have big brains, relatively long lives, complex societies, complex cognition. Basically, they are the creative, intelligent ones. Right? And that is interesting because they are distantly related. So they're doing something that we call an adaptive package. We can guess that they have a similar problem, that they all, despite being from different origins, solving in a similar way, right, with a similar toolkit. And why? Because all of these species live in uncertain environments. which is basically the same problem that as a species in general we've had and any social species have. If you think about it, sociality is intrinsically complex. Right? It's always a runaway problem. No matter what strategy you devise, you need to keep moving in a kind of Red Queen type effect, right? Because your opponent will eventually find it out. So there's no strategy that has a defined value in itself. It's only contextual, right? And so this is the problem, of course, that Alice in Wonderland knew so well. You have no idea how confusing it is. Oh, sorry, I'm moving the wrong flag. There we go. You have no idea how confusing it is, all the things being alive, right? It's annoying, all the things being alive. Okay, I've worked it out. If I move 2 squares there and 1 square there, I can escape. No. Social complexity is a huge problem because it's this annoying thing of all the things being alive. So we face, of course, the same problem. We face the same problem as a species, and we face the same problem today at large. And how has nature solved it? Well, with this kind of adaptive package, which is creativity, complex sociality, but also key, extended juvenility. So what you find is that these guys not only play, what you see here is adults playing. And of course, there's Richard Feynman in the corner. So think about it for a second. Why would an adult organism play? So we have heard about play as kind of developmental scaffolding. Right, scaffolding in the same that you build a building and you build it with a scaffold. Once the building is built, the scaffold drops. Right? You don't need it anymore. So play for biologists usually has been thought in the same way. Okay, you build an organism with play. Of course, you mature, you get your driving license. Now you don't play anymore because you are built. Well, with animals that live in complex societies and constantly shifting, it's not quite that way. Your kind of to-do list as a warm-blooded vertebrate, it doesn't like, okay, check, reproduce and stop playing. It doesn't quite work that way. These guys have a huge marketing budget that they keep investing in play through life. And that's really unusual, because most animals don't do that. It is true and remains true that most animals only play in juvenility, because play is really expensive, and it's annoying, and it's full of bad ideas. So you end up in A&E consistently. You waste time. I mean, it is really, like, actually do a survey of any Saturday night, why are people in A&E? It's often play gone wrong. And it is not different for nature. If you look, for instance, squirrels and seals suffer greater rates of predation when they're playing, because of course they're engrossed. So play is not like the land of happy clappy at all. It's quite different, and it has darker sides, and because of course exploring boundaries has the cost of exploring boundaries, right? Hence George Orwell's point, he cannot be clean fun. So if anything today, I think with the summary is about that you need to pay the cost. Nature pays the cost, okay? And so you create this elite group of, social brain. It's like the brain trust in the animal kingdom, that they are willing to pay this cost. And moreover, they're willing to pay it through life, by inventing extended juvenility, right? By basically playing through life and playing in very creative and daring ways. So I don't think this is a coincidence. And if you further, and if you ask more broadly how nature does it, in a kind of big picture view of life, which is always fascinating to me, because, again, if you think, okay, R&D, okay, who's the biggest R&D department? I'm sure Ogilvy is doing very well, but with all your respect, evolution has been doing R&D for a lot longer than Ogilvy, right? I mean, at least and we can think of the last 4 billion years of life on Earth as a huge R&D experiment. And it's very interesting if you look at the big picture of the major evolutionary transitions of like the great innovations in life. Because there are patterns that occur again and again. They're telling you something about the concomitant properties of, say, collective creativity, right? Of which play, it's a behavioral example in a kind of micro way. But I'm going to show you what I think are the kind of 3 main components that can be extrapolated and actually applied quite usefully. So this is what Minder Smith called the major innovations in evolution. Again, leaps in complexity. When you go from unicellular life to multicellular life, right? When you go from animals that have a free life to complex societies, when basically the invention of sexual reproduction, the invention of eusociality, and so on, right? And so what does nature do here? The basic thing being that, and this is, you will recognize, the quote, of course, is a famous evolutionary biology to Dostoevsky that said, nothing in biology makes sense except in the light of evolution. Of course, we think nothing in marketing makes sense in the light of evolution. So in a similar way, if you think about these properties, think about the eukaryote cell. You are built of a eukaryote cell, as a blue whale is built of a eukaryote cell. It's a fantastic innovation. But it had a cost. And so how is this thing built? The first property is something called, it's just simple connectivity. Namely, two things that were separate come together to cooperate, right? And I mean that at the broadest level. So of course, in the example of the eukaryote cell, you have mitochondria coming together to cooperate with a cell that has a membrane. You can apply the same principle to two animals coming together, to two ideas, institutions, and so on. Then when this happens, you get the second principle, which is diversity, diversification. Usually you get an increase in role division. You get differentiation of roles. So as societies complexify, as organisms complexify, you will get more role division. Nobody knows, I pencil. Nobody knows how to do a pencil. Nobody knows how to do a computer. So that very simple prediction means that we will continue to get more and more diversification of roles. But of course, the challenge is how will we deal with the connectivity part of it? And the final element is that of energy. Why? Because it costs. To build a higher order complexity system costs more energy than to run the lower complexity system. But what's interesting is that once you build it, it also increases its own capacity to generate energy in turn. The evolution of the human brain is a great example. So to be able to run our brains and to have been able to evolve our brains, we really had to come up with very clever solutions, and there were several. But in turn, of course, human brains are able to generate more wealth in turn. It's like living in London or living in New York. It's very expensive, but these cities are, of course, more creative than living in the middle of nowhere. And so if we think then, again, the principle of connectivity, bringing things together, differentiation, increasing division of roles, and energy. You need to pay the role. Like Tom Petty said, there is no easy way out. And I think that is like the main thing that you will see in this issue of nature having a huge marketing value in this kind of hedonic enjoyment. And so now let's step back a little bit less in history and think about the heritage of the human family. By the human family, I mean the primate family, of course. And what is the primate family? So this is the primate family. Yeah, and it took you a while to recognize my chief example of human. It's just like a few second lesson in human evolution, just because I never want to hear that we descend from apes. We do not descend from apes. We are apes, okay? And bonobos and chimpanzees are not our ancestors, our cousins. We share a common ancestor around 7 million years ago. It's the equivalent of sharing a grandmother. Of course, you do not descend from your cousins, you share a grandmother. So that's all. And we share different traits with bonobos and chimpanzees, which of course, they have continued their own paths, right? So they are not the same, nor they are forms of arrested proto-humans, right? But of course, like in any family, you share traits, and because we're looking at kind of big picture processes, understanding sociality actually really is quite useful to look at these animals, because they don't speak. And that is actually wonderful in understanding general principles of behavior, because of course people tell you why they do things, and the reason is a very different one. So I study bonobos in the wild. I'm very interested in particular in behavior in the wild. Why? Because when we see things like exuberant play, often people have said, well, perhaps it's just a feature of captivity. Perhaps humans were only doing this now because effectively it's a feature of captivity. Right? So of course we cannot go back to hunter-gatherer days, but at least I can look at our closest living relatives in the wild and see, do they really still have this huge budget, marketing budget in the wild? Surely not. Surely, especially if you're an adult, you have more serious things to do. You know, like find food and look out for predators and find yourself a mate. You know, do serious animal stuff. You're in the wild. This is real life, right? And it is very, very, very serious indeed. These guys only live south of the river Congo, so let me see if I can point out. That's the Congo River in DRC, and the red dot points where the research camp is. And so really we've been extremely fortunate in being able to follow the lives of our community for around 40 years. And in doing so, the most basic finding is that play in the wild exists. Play in the wild is rampant. The budget is there. These animals are consistently investing in a huge cost in both time, energy, and physical risk and social risk to engage in hedonic behavior. Why? Well, play does a very basic thing if you think from the point of view of the evolution of emotions. A simple problem that an organism must solve is wanting to interact. You know, we take that for granted. But of course, motivation is everything. How do you make an organism, any organism, want to interact? Play is a hack. It's a social technology. It's like having your brain in drugs. You go like, I really want to do this. This sounds like a great idea. And you go, no, it's not a great idea. The kind of things we do in play, the kind of risks we take in play, often are really bad ideas. So last night we were joking in forming the Department of Bad Ideas. Because humans, if anything, are full of bad ideas in the sense of like, yes, let's climb Mount Everest. That sounds like a great idea. And you go, no, it's not a great idea. And so you see through the history of human evolution, we have this drive, which is really quite curious. Why would we do these things, which obviously are not maximizing any sort of sensible risk analysis? Because it just doesn't stand it. Play completely defies that. And one of the things that we see in terms of motivation is what laughter does. So, of course, we are not the only ones to laugh. Other animals laugh, great apes laugh. And we see in great ape laughter that laughter is like adding, it's like interaction on steroids. You add laughter, and animals want to do it even more. So, for instance, if I look at, if I analyze my data on play that has laughter lasts a lot longer. Similarly, in my lab, we looked at conversations that happen in the bar. Sorry, we also did that. But in this, but in this case was actually to remove the confounding error of alcohol, which is actually very interesting, but that's a different story. We looked at conversations that happen in the park. So just naturalistic observations. And asked a very simple question. When do people want to engage for longer? And if you just look at conversations that contain laughter versus conversations that don't contain laughter, guess what? Conversations that contain laughter last much longer than conversations that do not contain laughter. So let me show you how laughter in a bonobo sounds and looks like. Oh, no, I think I had it cut. OK, don't worry. You'll have to look it up. If you Google BBC animals in love bonobo laughter, you get the clip. It's basically, they sound like, it's funny. But it's actually very interesting because it's both similar and different at the same time. But I don't want to show you the whole clip is long. And so, of course, social technologies like humor and laughter and dancing and singing and feasts and all have their evolutionary substrate on playfulness, on play behavior, broadly construed, right? So what kind of environments lead to these conditions are kind of environments that are particularly important to think about. And in one, to think about in many respects, bonding, of course, occurs during play. But creativity and innovation actually are actually very dependent on play. In particular, creativity, much more than innovation. And here I'm going to make a distinction. Why? Let's just have a short definition. If you define creativity as like the generation of novel forms of behavior or ideas, regardless of whether it's useful or not, right? Let's forget that for a moment. And innovation as the application of this means that basically we have a basic distinction that creativity is generating new stuff, and innovation is new stuff made useful, right? So if you think of it that way, it means that the properties, both at a organizational level and individual level, that you need for creativity are different than the ones you need for innovation. And I think it's an important distinction to make, because, of course, innovation requires, the new stuff made useful side of it, requires, a type of perseverance and long-term planning and just sheer luck that is different from the generation of ideas. Okay? So when I talk about play, I'm really referring to the creative part of it. So innovation, you can think about this is the efficiency side of the equation, right? But in play is really kind of the investment in the creativity side of the equation. And in particular, in particular in fluency and originality. So creativity has many components. Fluency is like how many ideas can you generate? So and originality, of course, how novel is that idea. And if I put you in a playful mood, you will score much higher in tests that look for improvements in fluency and improvements in originality. So this is important because we have been used to thinking that creative insight happens when we're calmly, like staring out of a window in kind of quite pleasant but latent states, right? So this is, if you look at emotion in the sense of emotion can be positive or negative and can be activated or deactivated. Actually, you have to think that highly creative states happen in the positive and activated phase, right? In other words, creativity happens when you are having fun, right? And fun looks, of course, and feels like this. Right? This is not just being relaxed. So this is the kind of state that I mean. Let's go. I'm just going to change a little bit. I want to show you about one slide about cost, okay? Because I really think the point of cost is very, very important. So bonobos pay the cost, and nature pays the cost. And in nature, for instance, in Congo, when you look there are two main seasons. There's the rich season and the not-so-rich season. These guys still have a lot of fruit. So I call it the high fruit condition and the low fruit condition, right? There's more energy and there's less energy. So play is more or less a constant. But you see very clearly that, so here, the orange crosses are high fruit condition, okay? So this is when there is wealth. This is summer. And you see that play rates go through the roof. There is always play, right? But you only have exuberant parties, really, when you have that abundance. And that's important, because it's telling you about, obviously, contextuality. There's a time and a place, but also about the real cost that this thing has, right? But they're willing to pay for it. So, for instance, a bonobo budget, you could see, this is a day in life, about 15% of the day spent playing, but this includes the little ones. So I want to start wrapping up and saying, what is the main condition I think that fun requires? Because to talk about the biology of fun is all very good, but I don't think fun can be prescribed from top down. You can actually create the conditions. I'll show them the one video. The point is that fun and engagement requires unpredictability. And it has to be real unpredictability. Unpredictability is much more addictive than actually predictability, weirdly enough. Right? So I'll show you an example. So you need a little danger. We call them the trust games. So what's going on here? You see basically an individual that is larger than another, and it's just swinging them. The point here is not that they're both grabbing onto each other, therefore the little one retaining control. No, the big one has all the control, which means that this is very dangerous because, of course, they could let loose and the little one would fall, but they don't. That's the first thing. There is an element of trust there. The second element is that the little guy that's being hanged finds it very funny. It's hysterical to take this risk, and you go, why? No, this is a bad idea. So look, even old 45-year-old males do it, and you will see a play face in that little guy there. Right? And there you go. Yeah, taking this risk is fun. Right? So you need that. But actually, they will take it even further. Because this interrelationship between risk-taking and trust is actually very fine. Oops, sorry. It's actually very fine. There is a point in which play will break. So to really push risk, I want to ask, what's the most vulnerable part of the male anatomy? The ego? No, I mean it. It's okay. It's a question. Don't laugh. Just tell me the answer. Well, presumably testicles, right? So, because, I don't need to explain. So, I will show a video. So anything that involves that kind of vulnerability surely is a very bad idea. But again, animals push limits. And I will show you an example of a ring-a-rosy game where risk-taking is definitely explored. So what you see there is that there's a female behind, and she literally, well, has him by the balls, right? Yeah. There we go. So I'm not going to suggest that you do this tonight. Again, we're talking about animals, but this is important. Remember, nature takes risks, and there is no easy way out. So you need to be okay with paying the cost, but in doing so, it's also fun. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
I'll do one question. Yeah. We only got time for one question. What I think is fascinating there is the point that if you assume away trust, then the costs of establishing trust, which are necessary for any form of social interaction, including exchange, okay, will appear to be an inefficiency or an absurdity. But they're actually a necessary cost to establish the conditions under which the exchange can take place at all. So that fascinates me. We've got time. One question. Who's going to grab it? Gentleman there. Yeah.
So my question is, I think we spend a lot of time building things so we can measure how we're doing to try and make us better. We spend a lot of time trying to measure how good we are at things. Do you feel like actually that gets in the way of play? Because we're constantly trying to improve our scores, actually, and we're afraid of making mistakes. We're afraid of having a blip or a wrong score or getting something wrong. So I've got this great thing that, okay, I'll admit it, I play golf. And I've got this thing that measures my golf swing. I'm afraid of trying out new things because it'll show a readout that I've done something bad. Actually, everything you're telling me is throw away the measurement and actually start experimenting and playing with other people rather than trying to measure everything. And that flies in the face of a lot of the things that maybe I've felt.
The short answer is yes. So I think because you see it very clearly, play is like a thermostat. It's actually very, very sensitive to fear and stress. So the first thing, because in a way it's a luxury that produces luxury. So of course, there's a little bit of fear and stress, play disappears immediately. That's why the conditions for it have to be really well set. Having said that, nothing comes from nothing, and everything has a time and a place. So this is not to throw caution on the wind, because there is an order. If you throw a novel stimuli to a person, to an animal, to a young baby, play does not just happen. You cannot contrive it in the kind of Silicon Valley, like top-down, let's have fun now, group hug. No, it doesn't work. There's an order. First, there's exploration. There's object manipulation, then there's exploration, that's play. What I'm saying is that you need to set the conditions for that kind of minimum trust to be built. And then you take the risk on top of that, if you see what I mean, right? So risk-taking requires a minimum. Of course, that ball game does not happen in a vacuum. Right? You need a condition, and then you can take that risk on top of that. But of course, without that risk, you're not going to push the boundaries, which is George Orwell's point, right? You cannot have real creativity with clean fun. And so, yeah.
That's amazing. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
So the interesting thing, too, I know I mustn't keep you from the coffee break, is there's a kind of aspect of animal interrelationships where it isn't about conventional economic exchange of I give you this, you give me that. You have to have a quid for which there is no pro quo, if you like.
Yes.
That establishes some sort of trust on a longer period or higher order level than mere one-off exchange.
For sure, especially if you're thinking on long-term interactions. Because, see, plays not necessarily you will always be building a long-term relationship with your playing companion. You might be building, for example, just diversity of experience for yourself.
Gotcha.
But it's like a wild card. You invest in a wild card. It's expensive. You have no idea when and exactly how it's going to serve, but the value will be determined by context, and it will be useful.
Fantastic. Thank you, Isabel. Thank you very much indeed. That was brilliant.
Thank you
so much.
Thank you.
Coffee?